Good morning. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Monday morning, Jumpstart it.
Good morning. What's happening, Jade?
So I think this week it's a pretty big topic. A lot of people listening to us are starting out this new journey as a copywriter, or they're in the thick of it. And everybody's encouraged to be like working 24/7 and super hard work. And we understand that learning a skill is as hard work. A new skill is hard work. So where do you find the balance there of like, you have to put an extra effort to learn something or to make something get off the ground, but then it's actually like you're suffering, So where is that balance for you?
Yeah. Well, the balance is probably going to be different for everybody,
Okay.
right? But I do think you're onto something with that. I think when people put foot on path to this, or to your point, they're further down the path. I think a lot of time people measure their work by how much time, their success by like I'm working a lot of time, or they've been told the tale. And notice that I call it a tale because fundamentally I don't believe it, that to be an entrepreneur means to work 70, 80-hour work weeks, and that's what it is. And now I do believe in hard work. I do believe in putting in the hours, and I believe in all that stuff. But I also believe that if that's the way you start your business, you might just find yourself in that business. And what I mean by that is you're working 60, 70 hours a week. 3 years down the line, you now have a successful business working 60, 70 hours a week, which is not lining up to your value. So I just don't think it's the time. It reminds me of that whole, well, I encounter it all the time in business and in life. Like, how are you doing, Jade? I'm just grinding it out. And I fundamentally, like life shouldn't be a grind.
Yeah.
So what are you really trying to create here? But I do go next to that. We hear this grit versus grind. I like grit.
Yeah.
I like grit a lot,
Necessary.
right? I like grit a lot. I don't necessarily like grinding it out. And when I think of grit, I think of words like perseverance. I think of words like focus, right? Yeah, I think of words like resilience, right? So I think about different words with grit than I do grind. And I don't want people building their business thinking that this is going to always be a grind. That doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard. Doesn't mean you should put the hours. I'd rather you be putting focus hours. I mean, last week we were talking about social media. Do you need to be on 5 channels, spending a half hour a day on each channel, or do you need to spend an hour focused in a meaningful way on one channel? Which is going to get you the bigger bang for your buck? It reminds me of a statement that I used to say when I did sales training, which is never confuse activity for achievement, which I'm telling you, too many people do that.
Yes.
And badge of honor, I work 12-hour days and I'm an entrepreneur and I'm killing it. Okay, if that's your definition of killing it. So I do think you're onto something about, how are you starting this journey off or further down the line? I personally hate the whole I'm grinding it out thing. No, I can tell you that right now.
When you gave your definitions of grit versus grind, it almost sounded to my translation in my head was quality and quantity, right? It's like the grind is just a lot, right? But what is the quality of what you're doing versus grit? When you focus and when you persevere and when you're putting in that energy and that effort into specific something that you're getting a specific result out of it, right? I think that takes you so much further. It's like, the whole hour of like the whole idea of that. If you gave a worker like an 8-hour workday or a 4-hour workday, they could probably do all the same work in 4 concentrated hours versus like 8 spread across, got to do this over here, like that. And so I think that can sometimes be very important. We did this session, it was probably one of our first ones, Ted. It's like, what are you spending your time on? Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important, even when you're learning the skill of copywriting. It's like, what are you spending your time on? And not on, and if you look at that and you say, I'm doing these 5 programs, stop. You should never be doing one skill building and one business building one at the same time. And I can tell you, just to get through a course does take grit, right? It's not an easy thing to learn a new skill. It's going to take perseverance. But I think focused efforts are going to get you so much further than a lot of things in a lot of places and thinly spread. And I don't know if you remember this conversation, Ted. It must have been like 3 or so years ago now that we had with Michael Katz. And he said that
you remember Michael.
Remember, and he said that when he went to work for himself and he realized, oh, like, I can do the same amount of work in just 2 hours and I don't have to feel guilty about it and I'm accomplishing the same. And he said he had to learn to lose the guilt that was associated with that, you know?
See, I love that the expectation of, right? Don't fool yourself into thinking just because you're putting in 12 hours that you're being, efficient or successful. I was lucky enough. I was in the chief learning officer role in my young 30s. Probably shouldn't have been. I was too young. I didn't know, but landed this executive role. But I worked for a very brilliant man that cared about me. And his goal for the second year that I was working there for the business was lights out at 4:30. And I learned that from him. Like, he's like, look, and by the way, I'm not changing my revenue goals. I just want lights out at 4:30 because that tells me we become efficient and that people are living fulfilled lives. I was like, man, that's the first time I've ever heard a CEO say something like that. And again, that's not to be mistaken with you're not going to work hard. Because sometimes people go over here and go, well, what, you think this doesn't require hard work? No. And as a solopreneur, there will be 60-hour work weeks. I mean, it happens.
Yeah.
But what kind of business are you trying to build? And what are you fooling yourself into believing really is going to get you to where you want to be? And I think grit is going to get you there a whole lot more than grind.
And I think the grind is going to, is not a good long game strategy.
No.
You're in this for the long haul and the long game, and you want to be around and you want to be a healthy human being and here for those people in your life. The grind is never going to get you there. And yes, there's going to be, like you said, for sure, there's periods like, even at work, there'll be periods when I'm working till like after hours and late, it's prepped and ready and all the rest of it. But then there's times when it's down, right? I should have mentioned this earlier. I read this recently, and it's that you do not have to earn rest. You don't have to earn
I like that.
rest, right? So it's like when you have those downtimes and when things are just slow, like it doesn't mean you have to do something really difficult to then absorb and just have a moment, like we should be doing that all the time. And it's not a reward for like grinding it out that you get to then relax, so I think it all goes into your own well-being as well, like being conscious of what you're doing, being conscious of how you're feeling and your health in the situation. So homework
all right, well, we got people thinking again. Think about this whole idea of grit versus grind. Have you fallen victim to the stories that are out there that it's going to require 12-hour days versus, it may some days. I love the statement, never confuse activity with achievement. So go back and go, am I just really busy? We could tie it into last week with the social media thing. Are you on 5 channels or just 1? But what does grit mean to you? I'll throw another word because I threw a couple words out earlier with grit. One of the most life-changing and business-changing was conviction for me.
Ooh.
Being convicted in what I do, being convicted in what I want, being convicted in the life that I want, and being rooted in that, right? And that made me more efficient, right? And quite frankly, it made me more successful. I know you put me on the spot a week or 2 ago and asked me what happened to my business. Conviction is probably the number one thing that grew my business. And it was convicted in my value and convicted in the life that I want, which then was a deterrent of it determined my time and how I used it, etc.
Wow, amazing. Okay, well, I think that's also a good segue because next week we're going to be talking about habits, Ted, and it sounds like what we're mentioning today falls into that category. So we can have everybody join us next week, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Cool. Thank you, Ted.